how often is the data being sort of neglected, I guess is what I'm getting at.
A lot of brands do neglect it, mainly because a lot of times on the marketing side, they don't have anyone to pull it.
Hey, what's up, guys, and welcome to Growth Mentors, the podcast where we share snackable growth hacks, strategies, and best practices in how to drive maximum marketing impact and grow your bottom line. I'm your host, Matt LeBlanc, and today we're going to be talking about data ownership, management, and visualization. It's a really important topic to be talking about because whereas data is really at the core of a lot of what we do in terms of marketing and business, it is the defining factor that sort of drives the direction that we're taking a lot of the time. It is also something that is very commonly misunderstood. The processes are misunderstood and frankly, they're neglected a lot of the time. So we're going to be digging into the real basics of data ownership, management. How do we go from getting raw data from a platform? Does it even come from a platform? And how does it end up in those dashboards and in those presentations that we're looking at in the meetings? So here to walk us through it is the Managing Director of Data and Analytics at Jump 450, Tom Murray. How you doing, Tom?
All good. How are you now?
Doing real good. Tom, who does own the data? Where does it come from? Is it being pulled from the platforms or through third-party tools?
The answer, of course, is it depends who owns the data. But really, the first things first, you have to figure what data sources do you want to pull from, right? So most of the times that is the ad platforms themselves. So think Facebook, Google, TikTok, and so on. But then there might be other systems you want to also get into your reports. So think of like third-party analytics systems like Google Analytics, Adobe Analytics. And that'll be for things like how many sessions did we have on the site? What was my time on site? What was, how many people bounced from the site originally? And then there's a third section that most people try and bring in, which is your overall site sales. So think of that as like Shopify, BigCommerce, or wherever your sales data lives. Usually that's outside of Google Analytics because that's beholden to the tracking you're using, whereas you want to have the exact real numbers that actually happen. So that's actually things like how many orders did I have yesterday? How much revenue did we do yesterday? How many of those customers were new? And then the goal is how do we combine all those three kind of different sources into one place? So those are three different data types. But then in terms of who owns the data, well, the clients probably have made the ad accounts. They've probably made all those three accounts. Then it's a matter of who pulls the data, which then gets into the question of who owns it, because then if we're pulling it, we would technically own it, but it's the client's data, so they're also owning it. So it gets very confusing and muddy very fast.
Right. And when you say we, you mean we like as in Jump on the agency side. So
yeah.
It's the person who's setting up the accounts and stuff you're saying are the people that own the data. But can you give us kind of like a typical scenario here? Like typically are brands super keyed into this and they're very active in pulling the data? Are all agencies as clued into this as we are? Like, how often is the data being sort of neglected, I guess is what I'm getting at.
A lot of brands do neglect it, mainly because a lot of times on the marketing side, they don't have anyone to pull it. A lot of times their business resources on the intelligence side will be very much focused on business level data. So think of like things that you might need to put into like an investor or a board meeting versus ad spend on Facebook, right? So they usually have limited resources, which means they can only focus their time on certain things. And usually that's for overall business level things is what I found. So some clients have data resources, but they're prioritized on other things, right? So then they ask the marketing agency to help supplement a lot of that data. Then there are some companies that have no data resources, which is actually quite common. Still gets neglected a lot. Where it's like you kind of forget about all the data. And I've seen a lot of both clients we've onboarded or pitched or from my previous life or even other people that I talked to too. A lot of clients have no reports. They might be like janky Excel reports. Maybe they're in Google Sheets, and it's like you get one view, which is like, oh, we get some weekly data that someone manually fills into a spreadsheet, which manual obviously takes a lot of time. But my issue with that is it's very prone to errors, right? It's not automated as well. So it's a lot of wasted time. And also it's very easy just to type in the wrong number, right? So neglect is quite high, which means you need to eventually invest in certain things, which we'll probably get into, to automate it, as well as make sure everything's accurate.
Right. And that is exactly why it is important for us to be talking about this, because that feels like a huge disconnect to me, like a real that neglect. It's in a world where data is so valuable to companies. There's been a whole industry pop up just from extracting data, and lots of times, all of us are sort of on different websites and performing actions online. We're like, how does this place make money? It's like they're making money selling your data. So data is sort of running at this premium, and yet at the very surface of this conversation, and you're basically saying like, hey, it's super common that companies are neglecting pulling and looking at this data. So let's get into the weeds a little bit here. How do you extract the data? What are our options here?
A lot of options. So the most basic option is literally you going into whatever source you're looking at. So when I said Facebook, Google Analytics, you can export data yourself manually. You can go and find your report, save it, click export, downloads it to an Excel. And then honestly, some of the biggest agencies in the world still do this, where they populate a whole Excel sheet with like 17 different data sources, and it all then uses some formulas or pivots to like aggregate it together. And they do that because it's easy. And also a lot of times I've always found reports have to be built to the lowest skill level of someone on the team that touches that report. So what does that mean? That means if you're going to have somebody who's just out of college work on your reports in Excel, the reports have to be easy enough for that person to be able to fix it if something breaks, which means the formulas are very basic. That means it's very simple where, I have to export this out, populate it here, and so on. There's no going outside the lines at that point. So once you start moving data into warehouses and storing it, you're going to have much higher level resources that actually know what they're doing when it comes to this stuff. So that means you can get more advanced, which is nice. So I just find a lot of times the reports are quite basic at that point. So that's if you pull it manually, right? Where you should be going to is an automated tool. And there's two ways to do an automated tool. One is you can go build it yourself. All of these channels and platforms have the APIs, application program interfaces, that you can like connect with some code to pull at a cadence. Every day, pull me the Facebook data for yesterday. That's simple if you know what you're doing. It's hard for people that don't know anything about coding, but you can find somebody quite easily to build something like that. The problem is those APIs change frequently. When I say frequently, I mean at least once a quarter, and to the point where that change will break it and you will pull no data, right? Even if it changes 1% of the API, you can get no data back, right? So that means you have to fix it every time. And then imagine that across all your sources. And those API changes are all random. Sometimes you know about them, sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's what they're called breaking changes. Kind of like breaking news, but breaking changes where you don't have any notice. And then you have to move to it immediately to go fix it. That's no good.
Right.
So the better option is using a tool that already exists. The problem is you have to pay for that, right? So there's a bunch of tools. So we use Data Channel, which is a great tool, but there's some other ones, Funnel.io, Supermetrics, Fivetran. Those are ones that are commonly used. And those already have the API hookups to a lot of different sources that many people pull. That makes it easy because they handle all the coding. And then you just have to authenticate your account, click what you want, and it makes it very easy to make it work. It's kind of like a drag and drop editor. Like you can either code a website yourself or use the editors. And it just makes it so much easier to pull the data. The problem is that's only one step of it, but that's at least an easy way to automate it. But there's a cost, depending on how much data you have, that could be thousands of dollars per month just to pull your data.
Right. And I feel like in just to highlight sort of the issue in everything that you just walked through, whether you're pulling your data manually or you're doing something automated or really even using one of these tools, it seems like this is an area where you really need savvy operators. Having somebody, because things are going to break, right? Things are going to break. The data isn't going to come through. You also have something where it's like, even if we're only kind of at the first step of this, right? The data is being pulled, but then somebody needs to be there to sort of curate it into a dashboard. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the first step is extracting. The last step is visualizing, but there's a million steps in between that no one sees. A lot of them are very invisible. So like those general steps are, once you extract it, right, now you've got this raw data. Sometimes this raw data it'll be way bigger than what an Excel sheet can handle, right? Excel sheets can handle up to like 1.05 million rows or something like that. Most data sets that you're going to pull, especially the longer the data sets and the more granular you get, are going to be tens, if not hundreds of millions of rows. Like we have some clients that are billions of rows. Right? So because of that, you can't open this up simply in Excel. So you need special tools to be able to handle that volume of data. You also need special servers and computers and all that. That's a whole nother conversation of the equipment you need for that. But the first step is extracting. That's the easiest part because technically anyone could probably set up those extractions quite easily. All the rest of the pieces, though, need experts in whatever step of the funnel you're at this point. So the next step is, well, now we have to clean the data and we have to structure it. Because a lot of times raw data is messy. I'll give you an example. We have a client that wants a report that's by DMA. So like that's the metro areas, right? So think Atlanta, New York City, Houston, right? So there's 4 ad platforms I pulled the data from. Pinterest, Facebook, Google, and Bing. All 4 of them use different names for the same DMA. One will say Houston. One will say Houston TX. One will say Houston, TX. Another one will say Houston, Texas. Now, to you and I, we know that those are all the same thing. Computer has no ID, right? So now the funny part is there's a standard DMA list that is used. So like they shouldn't customize it, but the platforms love to make it hard for you. So like because of that, now you have to standardize to say, hey, all 4 of these things are the same. Now imagine doing that for all 215 DMAs. That's one, but that's just one thing, right? A lot of times the dates are different formats. The names are different formats. The column names are different. One might say spend, one might say cost. These are things humans know are the same, but the computers need to be told, hey, this is the same as this. Now that's easy to write, but you have to physically write code to merge all these things together and then actually say, hey, these are all the same thing. So you have to clean it and store it. So I call that the car wash phase, right? And and there's a few different tools to use it. Some of them are $200,000 a year. Some of them are free and everywhere in between. There's a lot of open source stuff that you could do, but that's just the next step. And that requires somebody who's hardcore into, SQL and coding and, more advanced things than just, I can see that those 2 things are the same. Now you have to actually write the complex code to make it work.
Right. Tom, and is there something in it for all of these platforms to be not standardizing their data in this way? What is in it for Pinterest to not be doing what, Google's doing or whoever?
A lot of platforms are called walled gardens because they don't like their data escaping. So a lot of times they make their metrics different because they don't want to be compared. Because once you can start comparing apples to apples, it makes it very easy to say, hey, my Facebook CPV, cost per view, is X and my YouTube CPV is Y. This one's better than that, so I'm going to give them more budget. So what do the platforms do? They switch it up. So like Facebook, their video view is 3 seconds, generally. On TikTok, it's usually 2 seconds. On Twitter, it's changed a million times. I couldn't even tell you what it is anymore, but it's changed. YouTube has also changed. It used to be a 30-second view. Now I think it's 10 seconds, or if you click beforehand. But if you skip it, it's free. So there's all these different nuances of how they make the data on purpose. That way I can't compare it as easily to make it apples and oranges at that point. Even with attribution windows, they're all different. So the more differences in the data makes it harder to combine it. So we try and combine as best as possible, but it's in their incentive to not make it easily comparable, because then you'll take a very simple analysis approach saying, hey, CPA is better than this one, give more money here. Like a lot of people will do something like that.
Great. So keep walking us through here. We're kind of in the several steps between extracting the data and visualizing the data. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've cleaned the data, right? So that's great, but it's still pretty raw at that point. So you have to set up a bunch of logic as well to like group everything. So you can think of this as, grouping everything into their buckets, if you will. So all the Facebook data's got to be Facebook. All the Google's data's got to be Google. But then underneath, you may start bucketing things out. Simple example, you have some ads that go to new audiences. We'll call those prospecting. And you have some ads that go to retargeting, people that have been to the site. Well, you have to bucket those users. And then you have to bucket all the data into those buckets. But you have to do that for all the different kind of buckets you may want. And a lot of times there's like 10 or more. So that's a lot of coding as well. And then at that point, then you need to store it somewhere. So you usually have a database, data warehouse somewhere. Those tools can get expensive, like Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, Snowflake. A lot of different places you can store the data to make it secure, right? Because you don't want to just keep it on a random person's computer in an Excel file. You want to make sure it's secure, that no one can get into it. So to get that level of security and avoid any breaches and things like that, you want it to a very secure database, right? Because some of the data on the marketing side is anonymized, but some of the data from the client side might have email addresses, phone numbers, names, things like that can get out, which is no good. So you need something very secure. So you got to make sure you have a database. And then from there, you need some more tools to write some more queries from SQL a lot of times, to then eventually visualize it somewhere. So there's a lot of different tools, a lot of different steps, but the people that are doing those different steps might be different, right? You might not have a generalist who knows everything, a little bit about everything. A lot of times you want someone really good at coding. You want someone really good at making visuals, because a lot of times those two people aren't the same. So that means your data team can start growing pretty quickly to make sure you have experts in each of the fields. It's no different than how we would operate, where it's like if we were running ads on Facebook, Google, Connected TV, and Pinterest, it's probably not going to be the same person buying all 4 of those channels.
Right.
We're probably going to have a social buyer, maybe a search buyer, and a CTV buyer, because we have experts in each of the 3. Same thing when it comes to these different phases. You're going to have different people at every step of the way.
Yeah, Tom, it sounds like you're listing off a lot of different team members, resources, and you're also listing a lot of different tools. So I guess what I'm wondering is there a sort of like when we were talking about data channel before, that's one of the tools that we use at Jump, right? So does data channel store the data? Are you able to clean the data within data channel? No.
No, there's a lot of different tools.
That wasn't even done with my question yet. You already know. So that's the point.
You need a lot of different tools, right?
Many different tools to store it, to clean it, to break it up, and then finally visualize it. Yeah.
There are some tools that do all of these things. So the best example is Domo. Domo is one. Domo.
One more time.
DOMO. Domo. So that, if you Google it, it's a visualization tool. But it also does all the other things we talked about. It extracts, it stores, it cleans, then it visualizes. However, just like a generalist versus expert, I think of Domo and other tools like that as all-in-one printers. If you've ever had an all-in-one printer, what does it do? It prints, it copies, it scans, it faxes. But it does none of them well. And it's expensive because you're buying the convenience of only having one tool. So a lot of times Domo as a whole, or and I'm not just calling out Domo, I mean any tool that does all of these things, because there are a few others too. Anything that does all of these things, you'll pay the convenience fee of having everything in one place.
Yeah.
But that means you're also stuck with whatever it does. So it may have a real bad gap in one of those phases, and you're stuck with it, which could mean you may not be able to get the exact dashboards you want. You might not be able to extract the data as frequently as you want. There might be negatives in certain spots, right? So the better approach is, if you have the right people to know what tools to get, build your own stack that has tools for each of those that are experts in each of those. You'll pay probably less per tool, and the sum of the parts will probably be less than the combined tool. But it's harder to manage because you've got things in a lot of different places. But as long as you have the right duct tape to put them all together, you're okay. But a lot of times that duct tape is the people who actually know how to connect these things properly.
Right. Tom, so often we have these talks, and I feel like the real big takeaway is like, you just can't cut the corners, you know? It's like, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. For data ownership and management, you need all the tools, you need all the experts. Take us home here. Take us into the visualization part. I think it's your specialty. You've created over 1,000 dashboards in your time. So talk to me about the process of, once we've got clean data and it's all broken up, now I need to create some dashboards.
Yeah. So once you have a lot of the data's still massive. So you still have to eventually write smaller queries. So you wrote a lot of queries already, and then you have to write smaller ones, okay? Because what's going to happen is your database will talk to the visualization tool of your choice. We use Tableau, but you could be Power BI, Sisense, whatever it is. A lot of times they need to talk to each other. And the speed in which you can display everything in the visualization tool depends on how big the data set that the query is. If you have a massive billion-row data set, you can imagine it's going to be slower to visualize it because it has to crunch all the numbers, right? So the more experience your team has in coding things, they can make the exact query with the lowest amount of data needed to make the visual you need. That doesn't sound that important, but in reality, a lot of people complain that dashboards are too slow. When dashboards are too slow, people don't use them because they complain about it. However, what I always like to explain to people is, imagine you're in a dashboard and all you want to do is change the date. Because the dashboard is just visualizing those queries, what ends up happening in the background, which you don't see, is you tell Tableau or Power BI, hey, change the date range from this month to last month. To me and you, that seems like something simple. The problem is Tableau doesn't have that data because they're not the ones storing it. All they're doing is connecting to the thing that has the data. So what Tableau then has to do is say, hey, data warehouse, let's call it Amazon, I need a new query, brand new query, but I don't need a person to write it. I need you to write it for the last month's data. So now it has to then write its own query on the back end, provide that new data set, make sure it's correct, then send it back to Tableau, Tableau is like, okay, great, this is in the format I needed it in. And then it has to do all the recalculations of everything, all the formulas.
Yeah.
And then it also has to redisplay, rechart, revisualize everything. And this can happen in 5, 6, 7 seconds. And sometimes people say that's too slow. But I'm like, when I explain this in terms of like all the things that go on behind the scenes that you don't see, you're like, actually, no, it's 7 seconds ain't too bad. Even if it was a minute, honestly, it's still way faster than anything you can do to grab the data yourself, right? But people are very impatient, having attention of goldfishes, right? So like sometimes 10 seconds is too slow, right? So you try and optimize that as much as possible, because if you can get a dashboard down from 5 to 4 seconds or 4 to 3 to load changes, people will use it more. No different than if there's a stat from Google, like every second you shave off your time on your website for like a load time, you gain like 7% in revenue or something crazy like that.
Yeah.
Same thing with dashboards. Every small amount of time I could shave off, the more likely my adoption will go up. And that means the dashboards are usable. If not, if people don't use the dashboards, doesn't matter if I build them, doesn't matter how good they are. If they don't come into it, that doesn't help anybody. So, the visualization is important to make sure that the data looks good, right? But there's also stuff that gets behind the scenes that people don't see to make sure that the visuals are fast and easy and accurate too.
Yeah. And I feel like correct me, but I feel like there's even one more step on this, right? So now we've got the dashboards up, and that's kind of for the operators, the hands-on keyboards, and all the people within the accounts, all the different marketing people to sort of like look and analyze and talk about this stuff. But there's also the sort of presentations, the highlights of the data that we're then, media buyers are pulling out of the dashboards to sort of highlight certain trends within the data, correct?
Yeah, because that's where people are going to start grabbing everything from. The dashboards won't exactly answer all the questions. Like, was last week a good week? You're going to have to go in and physically view it yourself and then interpret it. But a good dashboard can be read quickly without having to do, hopefully, too many steps, in which case you'll be able to see if the trends are good or bad very easily, right, with visuals. Whether it's a chart, line graph, even tables could be visual too, even though they're not the most pretty.
So it's a real quest that this data goes on from just appearing in the platform to taking it and cleaning it and managing it and getting it into those presentations. It sounds like it takes a lot of tools, a lot of time. It's a heavy lift on the teams that are maybe doing this, and the thing that makes it so important is it's really the data sort of at the center of everything that we do in a lot of ways, right? It's really kind of like guiding the mission.
Yeah. And a lot of times the time it takes to build these takes a long time, but it's kind of like, is it worth the investment? Usually it is, because when I first started marketing 12 plus years ago, half my day was fixing Excel reports and like pulling data, fixing formulas, adding formulas. That's just a waste of time, right? If you can automate it, it's better. But also now I know my data is more likely to be accurate. It's more likely because it's coming right from the source. I could do more advanced things than I used to be able to do with it, right? So even if there is a high time investment, you'll gain time back from not physically having to pull your own reports. You'll probably make much better reports that are more advanced, more analytical. You can do more customizations to get to things you actually want to get to, and then limit all the manual time in between, right? Almost every report, as long as you have the data source there, can be created and automated. If you've ever built anything in Excel or any kind of visualization tool before, it can easily be done in an advanced visualization tool, as long as you have the right people to build it. Half the battle is getting the data in the right spot. Some of the most advanced reports that we can do, more of the time gets spent just making the data set in the right format than actually building the report.
Tom, imagine there's somebody listening to this and, their eyes have sort of been opened to issues that they're probably having with their own data. If I'm suddenly hearing this and I'm going like, oh, I'm one of those people who's been neglecting my data, is there sort of, what's my first step to sort of getting started in fixing this? Can you outline maybe a couple of basic steps in terms of finding tools, or better than I do?
Emailing me would be the best step.
Yeah.
Because Jump, we can help. But a lot of times it's like, what do you want the dashboards to be? What do you want the data to be? What data sources do you have? Because you have to make sure that those automatic tools that exist have your data flows. A lot of times, because if you have any of the big kind of tools, whether it's Facebook, Salesforce, HubSpot, Shopify, all those generally have APIs with these big tools, right? And then you can go on a product hunt, if you will, to see like which one has the right features. But a lot of times people pick one, and a lot of times they have all the similar features, and maybe there's 10% that's like slightly different, but it has 90% regardless. If you go to Supermetrics, Fivetran, Funnel.io, they're all very similar, slightly different prices, different pricing models, things like that. Some are more a la carte, some are more like, hey, give me an annual contract. So those are things you have to like operationally decide. But for the most part, they all can provide at least way more than you currently get, right? So that's the other thing I try and remind people. It's like, the first thing I usually ask a new client is like, what are your current reports? They're like, oh, we hate them. I'm like, I know you do. That's why you're with us. But I need to know what you're comparing against, because I know you're going to want a million things. But we have to remember what your baseline is, which is this bar down here.
Yeah.
So I need to be able to recreate that and make it better. And then we'll get better over time. So sometimes people know their reports are bad, but they want to jump to like a pristine level. But that's going to take time. Right. So the first thing is getting the basics. Like, oh, let me get the data automated first. Even if you automate the data, but then still use Google Sheets or Excel, that is way better than you manually pulling the data. Right. And then once you have the data in Google Sheets and Excel and it's looking nice, well, then you could say, okay, well, how about me putting it into a warehouse? Like you could do this in batches. You don't have to just jump to having all 7 or 8 tools into one place immediately. You can do this in phases, because just like in coding, if you build the whole thing, this is something I learned back in college. But if you build all the code, right, and it's thousands of rows, and the thing breaks, the main way to troubleshoot it is you have to run the code in pieces and then find, okay, I ran the first 10 lines, it was good, great. I ran the next 10 lines, it was good. Next 10, error. Now I know where it's in the 10 lines somewhere, right? If you try and build this whole thing from scratch, it's going to take 3 times longer because you don't know which steps work together. So you want to do it in batches, right? So like, don't think if this is going to be a month-long project. It's probably going to be like a 12-month project or more, and you're going to bucket it down into phases.
Tom, let's end on a moment of self-promotion, but let's not make it shameless. Let's feel a little ashamed about it, right? Tom, you are a data expert. You are actually passionate about creating these dashboards. I know that we could go on and on about that, but if you are listening and you are interested in getting cleaner data, extracting more concise insights from your data, really just kind of cleaning up this whole process that we've been talking through here today. Data ownership, management, and visualization is something that I think we are really kind of working at the top of the pile here at Jump. So get in touch with us, and you might have Tom himself working on your account. And if you are listening and you are interested in exploding your own digital growth, you can get in touch with Jump 450 in the link below in the description. That is www.jump450.com. And don't forget to subscribe for more weekly episodes. Thanks, Tom. We'll see you next time.